Thank you. I want to thank Michelle Hughes for really taking the lead on today's Legislative Day and the committee members who have assisted in getting this together. As you all know, we're doing things a little bit differently this year, so we're doing 2 legislative days. So today is our light day. And the idea that we were thinking is we really want to make our advocacy a year-long process. We don't want to limit it to just one day. We want to always be advocating for libraries. So having 2 events over at Legislative Day really is going to help get that message across. So today we're going to have an exhibit table where we can really showcase all the wonderful things we're doing in libraries, really hit upon all of our one ask requests and what we would accomplish with that extra money. And then we want to keep the conversation going with our legislators so that we'll be ready for May to talk to them again when we have even more people joining us. So thank you for trying our experiment this year. I think it looks like a good success. I want to talk a little bit about what you have in your packets and what today is going to look like. So everyone should have a white packet. This is going to be a little bit different than the orange packets, which are on the table. Those are for our senators and representatives. If you did take one of the orange packets already, just know that later on we're going to make sure we pair up to see if anyone else has their senators or representatives as well. So just before you leave, make sure nobody else is heading over to see them as well so we can coordinate efforts. But what you have in your white packet is going to be a copy of the agenda. So after I'm finished here, we're going to have a presentation from Eli Turkel, Secretary Bullock, or the Deputy Secretary, Courtney Stewart, will be joining us to talk about the current budget landscape. Dr. Annie Norman will also be talking about our funding milestones, which will give us a good history and context of what we're asking for. Then John Filos will talk about construction initiatives, and then Michelle will go ahead and wrap us up before we head over to Leg Hall. If you can join us for Leg Hall, we will have the exhibit table set up starting at 11:30. You are welcome to come stand with the exhibit at any time throughout the day. We really would appreciate that assistance. But also take time to go meet with your senator and representative. Or if you don't have a meeting scheduled, please at least go stop by, say hello. It's a good time to start talking about your meeting in May. And then at 2 o'clock on the, which floor is it going to be?
Should be in the House and Senate.
It'll be in the House and Senate, concurrent. Okay, it'll be concurrent proclamation where we will recognize Delaware Libraries in the House and Senate. And then we also have at 2:30, Annie will be talking to the Joint Education Committee in the Senate chamber. And she's specifically going to be talking about the Valley Garden Imagination Library project that we are doing in Delaware. Also in your packet, you do have notes from today's presentation, if you do want to jot down any notes. And then we have our one ask one-pager, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. It'll look very similar to last year's. We have our funding milestones that Annie will also address. Our library construction requests for this year. Our library construction overview, and also our What's Your Passion posters that we've created with our legislators. And these are so popular that actually one of our legislators was even asking, can I get my frame poster today? So they're super popular. Make sure you share this with your legislator. Let them know that you've seen theirs, how exciting that is. So again, thank you all for coming today. We're definitely going to have some time to talk about how we want these to go in the future, what you'd like to get out of advocacy for libraries, how we can work together to create a really strong push to get more support from our representatives and senators. So with that, I am going to introduce Eli Turkel. He is a PhD candidate at the Biden School for Public Policy at the University of Delaware. However, he has also been a friend of mine for 19 years. Met way back when in high school when we were both in youth and government. So Eli has been doing it. So he actually went on to become a legislative aide. So he's going to talk today about his experience with that and give us some really good tips and tricks for talking to our aides and our legislators. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eli.
Great. Thank you, Allison. Can everybody hear me? I may not use a mic.
Go with the mic.
Okay. All right. Good thing I asked. So good morning. My name is Eli Turkel. I'm a PhD student candidate at the University of Delaware. And like Allison said, I was legislative assistant at the Delaware State Legislature for a number of years. I'm very excited to speak with you all this morning, in part because I'm excited to learn more about what the library system in the state of Delaware does. I'm a regular user of my local library, but I know that there's a lot of services that you all provide to your local communities, and so I'm excited to work with you to impart what knowledge I can about how the Delaware State Legislature operates, and to hear from you about what it is that you do to serve your communities on a daily basis, and hopefully together we can craft a message that will be successful in communicating with the folks who work day in, day out at the Delaware State Legislature. So first things first, how many people do we have here from Newcastle County? Okay, a lot. I know we have at least one from Kent. Who's here from Kent? Is it just Hillary? We have, okay. And Sussex County? All right, good. So we have a pretty good mix of folks from our regions here this morning. So thank you all so much for coming. I mentioned that I use the Delaware State Library System on a regular basis. So one of the things I'm doing with my PhD is adding technical skills. And one of the ways I've gone about that is to get involved with a group called Open Data Delaware. Some of you may have heard of us. Some of the librarians I've recognized because they help us out on a regular basis. Open Data Delaware advocates, teaches, and conducts trainings around open data and database and analytics work. And we hold our meetings at the Newark Free Library and at the Brandywine Library. So we do that in close partnership with the local librarians there. And we really would not be able to do our work without the support and the cooperation of the Division of Libraries. So the library system means a lot to me personally, and I'm really happy to be here. So what are we going to cover today? All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Legislative Hall and how it's structured, and kind of go over some things I think you should know about the way people are hired and what they do on a daily basis that might give you some insight about how to build relationships with folks in the building. We're going to talk about how to speak with legislators themselves, and then we're going to do some breakout sessions that I think will help folks think through what it is that you want to communicate with legislators. I know that a number of folks in the room have done this before, so some of it might be reviewed, and hopefully for those who have not done this before, this serves as a good way to think through what it is you want to communicate to folks in Legislative Hall. And then after that, we're going to kind of wrap up, and Allison and I are going to facilitate a session where we can get your ideas about how these types of legislative days and legislative activities should go in the future. All right. So background on Legislative Hall and the structure of the Delaware State Legislature. So Delaware has a bicameral legislature, right? There's a House and a Senate. There's 41 members of the House of Representatives, 21 members of the Senate. And that's kind of the basic layout, right? The Democrats currently control not just the House and the Senate, but also the governorship. And so you can kind of talk about those kinds of structural things. What I'm really more interested in doing with you today is kind of thinking through the actual way that the building is structured and the staffing systems within the different caucuses that make up the legislature, right? And so there's two. There's a House and Senate, and within each chamber, there's a majority caucus and a minority caucus. And each caucus has a chief of staff that works with all the legislators and thinks through kind of high-level strategic decisions. There's a communications director for each caucus. Some of the caucuses have a policy director. Some do not. The House Democrats have a policy director. And then below that, there's legislative assistants and kind of receptionists and different types of staffers that work within each caucus. And the caucuses individually structure their aid systems differently. Some of them are assigned individually to representatives, and they work directly with representatives. Others, other caucuses do more kind of do the organization more based off of constituent service areas. So you might have an aide that works, on transportation issues, another aide that works on kind of health and human services issues. And so, but the main thing to know is that the aides are working directly with the legislators on a number of different things. So on a typical day, a legislative aide in Legislative Hall might get a call, from a constituent about a road issue, at noon. They might have a bill coming up on the floor at 1. They might have, lobbyists who are in the building every day, like a Mary Davis or a Bob Byrd, coming in to talk with them about, what the hottest topic of the day is. They have to manage their legislators' calendar, make sure the legislators where they are. They're also probably talking to the chief of staff, making sure that the chief of staff is okay with the actions of the legislator, and that other legislators are okay with the actions of their legislators. So there's a lot of things going on in that building on a daily basis that the legislative aides are dealing with, and that's just something that I would really ask that you keep in mind when you go over and you speak with the legislative assistants. There's a ton going on. The legislative aides themselves, so Allison mentioned that one of the things I have up here is how legislative aides get hired, right? So Allison mentioned that she and I did youth and government together in high school. So this is a program run by the local YMCAs, right? Are people familiar with this?
Yes.
Oh, okay. But so those who are not, just for those who are not, so we would go to our local YMCA. I would go to my Western YMCA, and we would hold weekly meetings, and we would, craft like kind of draft legislation that we would bring down and talk with other teenagers about things that we think the state should do. They should probably push back that start time for high school, stuff like that. But my local advisor was Melanie Smith, who was a former representative, and so when I was 14 years old, I met Representative Smith, and I started helping her out with her campaign stuff. I would go door to door with her and talk with voters with her. When I graduated from college, I got back in touch with Melanie Smith, and she was able to get me an interview, and I was fortunate enough to get a job as a legislative assistant. So the point is that that those types of things are going on in this building constantly. It's Delaware. There's connections all over the place. I would ask that you keep those things in mind as well. The legislative aides themselves, like I mentioned, some of them work directly for representatives. Others are on constituent service issues. When I went through my hiring process, I was interviewed by the chief of staff, the majority leader, and the Speaker of the House at the time, who was Bob Gilligan. And so I became a legislative aide just after the Democrats took back control of the House of Representatives in 2008. So it had gone from Terry Spence, who was the Speaker of the House, and then Bob Gilligan became the Speaker of the House. Pete Schwarzkopf became the majority leader, and Val Longhurst became the majority whip. And so, we work for the caucus, right? Like I was assigned to legislators, but I worked for. His name is Eric Bracerstram now. His name was Eric Stram at the time. I worked for him. right? I was his employee. It was my job to serve the legislators, but he was my boss, ultimately. I could be reassigned to other legislators. I could, my responsibilities could be shifted around. I reported to Eric, and I reported to the House leadership. And so that's really important to know in terms of how, the incentive structure and why people are doing the kind of things the way they do there. And so I've kind of talked about what a day in the life of a legislative aide looks like. When the legislature is in session, it's crazy. I mean, you'll go over there later today. How many people have done this before? I should have asked. A lot. So most of you. So you kind of seen the hustle and bustle of Legislative Hall. It's like that every day, and that's the kind of the work environment. And so the thing that I want to get across to you is that it's going to take time to get your message across, right? And so I think building relationships with the legislative assistants is actually a really great foundation to build in order to then start speaking with legislators. Right. Yeah?
Are the legislative assistants listed on the state website? Is there contact information there?
So here's how I might go about it. There's definitely a phone number for each caucus on the website. There may be information on each legislative aide, but I'm not completely sure. What I would do is I would call the receptionist, and I would say, I want to speak with Representative Schwarzkopf. Could you put me in touch with this legislative assistant? And they would do that for you. And then you can speak with the legislative aide directly. And that legislative aide, just like the legislative aides have a lot going on, clearly the legislators have a lot going on as well. And a legislative aide will kind of be informing the legislator about, this person called, this other person called. Here's kind of where they're at and what they want from you. And so that's kind of why I'm emphasizing the relationship with the legislative aide. You're right to ask about how you can get in touch with them. And you're going over. So you're going over to the Legislative Hall later on today. I would speak with the legislative aide of the representative that you're trying to speak with. If you don't have a meeting yet set up, I know some of you have meetings set up with the legislators. But talk to the legislative aide, ask them a little bit about what they do, who they work for, and what I would ask that you do is to make the goal of today to set up a phone call or a meeting, but I think a phone call is fine, with the legislative aide for like 2 or 3 weeks from now in February. So the schedule of the legislature, they come back in, and some of this, again, I might be preaching to the choir, some of you guys might know this stuff. The legislature goes in January, and they're in for 3 or 4 weeks, and then they break for 6 weeks for Joint Finance Committee hearings. So when in January, it's it's crazy, and then the schedule kind of drops off, and you're having all these committee hearings, most of the legislators are not on the Joint Finance Committee, and so they don't have, their schedules are just much calmer, and they're kind of getting set up for the legislature to go back in March and April and May. And so February is a great time to start building those relationships with the aides and kind of start figuring out what it is that you want from your individual legislator and getting across to the aide what it is the libraries do. So that's what I would make the goal of today, to get that meeting, get that phone call with the legislative aide for mid-February, and start to build a relationship. Let the aide know what it is the local library and the legislator's district does. I'm sure I know that the programming for libraries is varied, right? I mean, you guys are running jobs programs and social services and coding camps for kids. I mean, and that probably varies by library. And so, getting across what it is your specific library does, I think would be really important to the legislator. And the legislative aide can start to kind of carry that water for you, kind of do your work for you by letting the representative know, well, I spoke with such and such from such and such library, and this is what they're doing. It sounds great to me. They kind of want to talk with you and and kind of get you engaged with what they're doing, and kind of build that rapport. That'll just make your job that much easier, and you can kind of start to form that relationship.
So can I?
Yeah.
I want to go back to Pat's question, because, there are gatekeepers,
Right.
and we all have had experience in just phoning in and trying to get somebody in a caucus, and, that's like one barrier you hit.
Right.
And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head that maybe we don't have the right question. And then the other thing is when we get over, the ladies and men who sit at those desks are also gatekeepers.
Correct. The receptionist.
So the message I think we're getting today, which is different, and what we've done in the past is that we should all try to get to our legislators is we should try to get to their aides.
Yeah.
And there's no list of them. So the question we should be asking is, who is Senator Sokola's aide?
Right. And the
So,
receptionist will know that.
And we ask the receptionist.
The
that.
Jan Durhams of the world, who's I'm sure she's still there, I have no doubt.
Yeah.
The House Majority receptionist, she will know who the aide is.
Okay, so if we do nothing else today, all right.
So DLA, we have a list of the legislative aides for every representative and senator. We worked with the legislative librarian and were able to get that. So we have a Google Doc. I can share that if you'd like. Okay. Because the Legislative Action Committee uses that when we set up meetings. So we have that information.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Check that out.
Cool. There you go. I thought there was another hand or two, maybe both related. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, again, preaching to the choir, respect goes a long way. These aides are just they're just running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and kind of showing that understanding and letting them know that I don't need too much of your time today. What I would like to do is set up a phone call with you for such and such a time and work around your schedule. We send you 3 dates or something like that. That type of stuff they'll be responsive to. We talked about the schedule and that kind of stuff. So, all right. So now we're switching gears. Now so we've set up a meeting with the legislative aide. We've kind of let them know what we're doing, and we've kind of asked for that meeting with the legislator. After that meeting, hopefully we've set something up. So now we want to speak to the legislators directly. And so when I was working in politics and campaigns, what we would call this is the story of self. And so at the beginning of this, I talked about my connection with the Delaware library system is that I work with Open Data Delaware. I use the libraries all the time, and I'm really excited to work with you. And so that is kind of a simplistic version of a story itself, right? I'm trying to communicate what it is about me that relates to what it is that you're doing, and start to try to build that connection. And so you want to know your story yourself, and you want to know how it connects to your message. Right, and so if your message is, we want funds from the legislature, well, what is it that you do that you can connect to that question and that message? And it doesn't have to be money. It could be something else. Like Allison has shared with me that in the past, DLA has had, I think it's called a library champion. Is that what it's called? And so I think that's a really great, I love that kind of branding of a library champion, and maybe that's something that you want your local legislator to be. Maybe they want them to come into the local library and do some social media stuff. That they're a library champion, and kind of maybe even meet with the local librarians, the folks who are using the library on a regular basis, and start to really kind of create that message. And so, again, you all know much more than I do about what libraries do. I've reviewed kind of the information about the asks for the bond bill, and the kind of the bottom line message that you want $1 per resident of the state of Delaware. And so I think that what you all need to do moving forward, and what we can kind of start to do today, is, well, how do your individual stories and the services that the local libraries provide, how do they kind of back up that ask, and how does that craft a story and a message that will make the legislators want to fulfill that request. And so what's important to legislators? Well, legislators want to get reelected so they can keep serving their communities, right? And nothing wrong with that. And I think that the local libraries can really start, can really fill that mission that the legislators want to come through on. So the local libraries, there are folks that, voters there every day. There are people in and out of the libraries every day. The library serves the community. And, the legislators can align themselves with the libraries, then they can show the broader public that they are serving the community as well. And so I think that it's kind of a win-win for the legislators to align themselves with local libraries. And I think that there's nothing wrong with kind of letting legislators know that supporting your local library will be a great message to voters when November comes around. And so we've already kind of talked about this, but just know what you want from the legislators. So maybe it's that funding, maybe it's a kind of a branding thing. We can kind of talk about your ideas for that in the last session. So what we want to do right now, I think, is kind of break. So these are some conversation starters that we were talking about. We'll leave these up when you guys are doing breakout sessions. Not that you guys need any help with it. We were just kind of thinking, well, how can we kind of start these conversations? And we came up with a couple lines. But we want to break out into paired conversations. And so if you just grab a partner and kind of start thinking through what you think your story itself is. What is it really that your local library does that you want to communicate with legislators? And know your message and what you want from legislators, the connection between the two. I'll leave this up here. We can kind of scoot back and forth between this side. Yes, sir.
As a former legislative aide, what was the best presentation that someone made to you about wanting to speak with your legislator that got you to encourage and set that meeting up?
It's a great question. And I said this to Allison when we were talking about stuff. I'll never forget, the person who taught me how to read the state budget was a lobbyist. Debbie Hamilton took me out to breakfast one morning. She wanted something from Mike Barbieri, who was the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. And she, we're looking over the budget, and she said, "Do you know how to read this?" No. Right off the bat when you asked that question, I'll never forget that meeting. Because she didn't look at me like I was dumb or I didn't know what I was doing. Though you probably could have made that argument. She helped me figure out, how to be better at my job. And so those are the kind of things, and the lobbyists get to do that kind of stuff on a daily basis, right? They're in the building always. And so they're able to share information, insights. They've been doing this for 20 years. Like Bob Byrd has been doing this longer than I've been alive. They just have insight and knowledge about how this process works that gives them a lot of influence. What I would say is just share the knowledge that you have about your local library and the things that are going on in your community, the details of it, because they probably don't know that. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the library on a daily basis, and that's what I would kind of suggest.
So you're kind of in a unique position to share with us what value you see in, because you do use our libraries.
Yeah.
So, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm thinking that the value that you might be able to articulate in how you use our services, that there's meeting room space, there's wireless access, there's collection, so just kind of get us thinking, because we're in our library land mode,
right?
And you're outside of that. So how would you articulate the value of what your organization has done?
I mean, the local librarians. There are folks here who help Open Data Delaware all the time, and so the relationships with the local librarians is fantastic. I come to the local library after a long day. I got another meeting to do. I got to get I got to get out the extension cords, and I got to get the markers, and I got to get such and such set
So
up.
it's support.
Support.
It's basically you're getting.
I'm getting a lot of support from librarians. There are some. I've had librarians, come up to me. I'll come into the New York Free Library, and they'll say, "Oh, we just got books in on this new computer language, R, and maybe they'd be helpful. Here they are. They're over here." And we may or may not use them, frankly, but to know that someone is looking out for my group and cares that I'm coming in the building means a lot. It means a lot.
I have just a smart question, maybe more for Diana and Annie. What do they already know? I mean, what are you guys giving, what at the state level, what do you already send to them? Or at the county level, what are you sending to the state that they already know? I don't want to beat the dead horse, you know what I mean?
Well, legislators?
Yeah, what do they already get from you all as a report? Do
Well-
they get usage reports and all that other kind of stuff?
No, what they get is what they're given basically in these packets, the 2 or 3 times that, let me finish.
I'm chewing my gum, sorry.
That's okay. This is what they get, but I think that what we need to really contemplate is we've been giving them some version of the same information for, the last 20 years or something. And we're very successful with capital projects because they have a story to tell. Where we haven't been successful, and just so you know who we're talking to people from our newest Newcastle County Library in Middletown, is we've not been able to connect the dots between giving us capital money for a project and giving us an increase in operating funds to do things in those new projects. We've just not been able to make that case. And so I think, the data we have out there hasn't changed. The information out there hasn't changed. It's just we're really struggling with making that case of how the activities that go on in the library need additional support. And, support is an important word. That's why you could really help us if you think more about that question, because that's been our biggest challenge is articulating value.
Yeah.
And I'll just say one other thing. By the way, I think you know my husband and my son. Mark Brown is my son.
Oh, yeah.
Alex
We've
Brown.
had email conversations. We've never met in person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alex and Alex.
You and I.
My husband. Yeah.
Yeah.
My family's taken great advantage of. But the other thing we're facing is we're very, very organized. We have our schedules organized. We have it together. But again, other barriers, headline in today's paper, state legislature asked whatever, 50 million or something for clean water, which, I'm a proponent of clean water. But because we're not a big thing, we're not a big initiative, it's really hard to compete with those huge things like clean water or, or prisons or an increase in education, healthcare.
Yeah.
And so I think that's our biggest challenge is everybody says libraries are great, we love libraries. Laura Sturgeon, who those of you who don't know her, is a new senator. Last year was her first year. She was so in awe of how strong our lobby is and how great our message was. And she goes, oh, you're going to get what you want. Well, we don't seem to be able to, jump that hurdle.
The dollar, per person is a good slogan, but we just can't compete with some of the bigger issues that are out there. So how is it that we become an important issue to them?
Right. And so I think I see the hands, and this is the conversation that we're gonna have after. And so all I want to do is allow folks the opportunity to reflect on the questions that you're asking, and then we'll have a broader conversation about it. We will take all the notes, we'll get your ideas, we can provide feedback. This is exactly the conversation that Alice and I were hoping to start. So, which is great. And so all I'd ask that we do right now is maybe take, 15, 20 minutes. We have more. Okay, take 10, 15 minutes. why don't we start with the think, pair, share? Because what I'm hearing from you guys is that this is that's really the conversation you guys want to have. So let's start with that. And what I'd ask is that just take a couple minutes. So I'm also a teacher, and so just take a couple minutes to yourselves, please, and just reflect on these questions that you were asking, and then just link up with the person sitting next to you and kind of have a dialogue for 5 minutes or whatever, and then we'll come back together and we'll facilitate a conversation around what you'd like to see in the future, and we can also have this conversation about message and value. All right. Cool. All right. Everybody come back together.
You know what?
You guys had some good conversations. We're going to come back together.
That sounds fun.
So does anyone want to share what they thought about, spoke about in their affairs?
It's like the hook movie.
Sure. Well, we talked about how there is a great connection that often exists between the local library and the local representative and senator.
Okay.
They're in the libraries a lot, many of them, that we know them on a first-name basis, and they care about libraries. What's missing is that when it comes time to decide about financial allocations, other issues seem to rise ahead of the case for libraries, even though there's a great deal of familiarity. And so it seems like maybe the answer probably does not lie in forming relationships with legislators. It's something else. It's maybe characterizing the relationship differently so that they not only care, but also better understand the financial need. Because that piece seems not to click through. Can I characterize that?
I know there's a gentleman that came up when we were speaking. Do you want to share your thoughts?
I had spoken of the need and for all of us to recognize that we talked about big issues that people may be more focused on, or legislators may be more focused on, but there's no, I would think, more central place that we have other than libraries where these big issues get discussed, get investigated, get researched, etc. So everything leads back to the library, and it's about connecting all of that to show you can't escape or have people separate the big issues from libraries. They're all connected.
All right, thank you. We'll go here and then we'll go back here.
So in our group, we discussed how we think it's important as we're sort of making these relationships. They are, a lot of times we do know our representatives, by first name, and we do have these relationships with them. And I think sometimes that gives us an advantage if we know what they're really passionate about and what their pet causes is. For instance, one of our representatives is an ex-state policeman and is very interested in prison reform. And when we spoke to him, we provided statistics that correlated reaching reading milestones with for prisoners. So if children are successful in reading, they are less likely to go to prison. And so sort of libraries can help mitigate that prison pipeline. And I think sort of finding those connections with what your legislators are really passionate about and how libraries fit in with that makes a more resounding message for them.
That was such a bad use. Very good connections. By being an information clearinghouse, very information subjects that legislators have been passionate about. So that even putting them out in the public display so people can take information about those causes that they support is useful, and we are information clearinghouse.
I asked this lady back here, and then we'll come to you next.
Part of what we talked about also relates to Leg Day, in that we feel that there needs to be more of an effort on a regular basis, kind of the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Right.
And through that, we were saying to maybe find out about the aides and talk to them and let them get to know us, but also ask the question, as the conversation was earlier, how can we support you? What kind of information can we get for you that would help you? And then also, the same question, but about the legislator. How can we support them? Like, two of us are from Bethany, Rehoboth area, and the big issue is going to be, a big issue is going to be the windmills out in the ocean. So, would your legislator like for there to be a community meeting that they can talk about or talk to the residents about and find out their positions? We can hold that at the library. And just constantly be bringing in how the library can help them, and it also gets the legislator in the library, and in some cases may actually get the aide in the library.
Yeah.
And to just continue doing that. The other thing we thought is, a question after how can we support you? Now it's the end of January, first part of February. What are going to be the top issues for your legislator or for your caucus or whatever that we could help gather information for, that we could help fill in the blank? I don't know what those answers are. That's why the questions need to be asked. And whatever we can do to get the legislator into the library and not just come once a year for a tour or go to his office once a year for Leg Day, but it being an ongoing, continuous relationship.
I brought up and we talked about how we have to first and foremost spotlight, highlight, and somehow promote ourselves through our successes and making certain that the legislators and others out there who are holding the little purse strings are aware of what our successes are. Because you can have 7 projects or items that you're doing as a library, and 5 of them are not so successful, and 2 are. So why spend all of your energy trying to build up those unsuccessful items? Promote yourself, get it in front of the legislative aides, the legislators, the public in general, of what your successes are, what the programs that you have in your library that are successful. That goes as far as letting media sources, no matter what they are, they may not run you every time, but somewhere along the line, it might fall upon someone who says, oh, this is interesting, this is a nice little piece, and they'll put it out there. As well, pair and share. You have it right up there. Think, pair, and share. Libraries that are in the same area, vicinity, under a legislator should be pairing and sharing instead of everybody standing like an island unto themselves trying to gain attention. Gather up and become a group. There is what is it, power or strength in numbers.
Right.
So instead of thinking individually, think more as pairing and sharing what you're doing, successes that you're doing, and then relate that, tie that totally into, for legislators in particular, totally into the fact that you are serving, or this was a successful program that was given or done for your constituents, for residents of Delaware. And not just in your area to share it statewide through the whole DLA, through the whole library system. And it could become ideas for a Rehoboth from up in Claymont, or,
Can I
Yes.
give a plug? So DLA does have our bulletins, our newsletter that we distribute. So those are awesome opportunities to share what's happening in libraries. So that way we can communicate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say also, the state friends, you'll be receiving a survey from us. And part of that survey, and I hope the directors and the friends groups will send back the survey, please. It's very short, 9 questions, 1 page. And it's asking you how we can help you. And we can help you by sharing just what you're talking about. Sharing the successes. If we get the information, we can then funnel it out to all the libraries. So please, when you do get the survey, please fill it in and return it to us. Thank you.
I have one more thing. about getting in front of folks or getting the information out there about the libraries and what we're doing is a phone call is great, but you never know what a person is doing when you're on the phone with them.
Right.
And they could be like me when I used to work. I would put people on the speaker, and I'm walking all over everywhere. I'm talking to you. I
Right.
hear you. I know you're saying something. But if we would look at technology in terms of Skyping or something, that puts a face to a name.
Yeah.
And if you utilize your phone time with Skyping to a legislative aide, they begin to build a different type of and stronger relationship with you than when you're always just calling and talking to them.
Yeah.
Because I know you can't always be in front of them and stopping in the office or whatever.
No, I think you're right. And so it might be better to do a Skype or a face-to-face
Yeah.
meeting. And it seems to me like that. I'm sorry. What was your name?
Oh, I'm with Tona. I'm with the Friends of Claymont Library.
Okay, with Tona.
Yes.
All right.
With Tona.
With Tona. So what you were saying seems to match up with what the gentleman was saying earlier about the large state initiatives, whether it's jobs programs or healthcare or whatever the case may be. The libraries help facilitate the solution. And so, maybe getting specific about what particular libraries, what the Claymont Library has done, in terms of jobs fairs, getting people jobs. Maybe that's the type of questions we can start asking and providing answers to. That to me sounds really concrete and something that a legislator would want to hear about.
Yeah, and one of the other things is, you have a question, but at the same time you have a question that you're going to log to a, legislative aide or whoever. Come up with, on your own, before you ask the question, solutions or answers, possible answers to those questions, and then think it through to how you can even sort of manipulate, I'm just going to use the term manipulate, that conversation to come out with to have a better outcome for you.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Are there any other thoughts, questions, or concerns that came up? Yeah.
My thing and my comment is, I think the first thing we need to do is thank them for supporting whatever they've done. And for us, we have a big gratitude this year with them funding the bill. So that's going to be our lead-in into what we say to them, is thank them for supporting our community and what they've done in the past by bringing this forward. Because while they do have the water issues, they did fund our building. So we are getting a building because of them taking a stand and saying that it was important. And I feel like that's our lead-in as, for where our community is coming with them. They did fund it. And many of them came and supported our fundraisers. So that's something we want to make sure and thank them for what they did. And they helping us. We have food at the beach festival. They run us stuff there. Jim has good contacts with all the politicians, and they all helped us. So it was very nice that way. And we wanted to make sure that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, it goes back to what I was alluding to, which is that this is my first time speaking with all of you, and I don't know the past relationships that you have with specific legislators. And those of you who have good relationships with legislators, legislative assistants, or whatever the case may be, I think it is really important to thank them for their past support and recognize that these, you're not starting the relationship today, but these are ongoing relationships that have gone on, in some cases for several years, and there's been lots of interactions. So I think that's a very good point. Yeah.
Going back to the comment that we've been doing this for 20 years, and how can we make this new and fresh? Probably longer than 20 years for some of you, but I was just thinking, wouldn't it be nice if maybe one year we could work towards collectively capturing stories, whether it's a few sentences from library users, just to say, what was the impact of last year's funding on your life, so that we could show that to the legislators next year. We can say, last year you gave us funding for X, and this is a concrete example of how that benefited your constituents. So we could, first thing that came to my mind is just little 10-second video snippets from people saying how these funds affected them positively. And I just was thinking about that because we were recently, UD recently took a group of librarians to the Museum for African American History in DC, and they had a booth where they were taking people's responses to their experience there, and it's just little video captures of people's reaction. And I was thinking that would be a powerful way for us to show legislators how they are positively impacting their constituents. Just little brief video snippets or just a few sentences from library users just to say, hey, this is how we're using your funds in a positive way.
Not to be by May. Not to be by the next Labor Day.
Everybody apparently likes to do selfies other than moi, but what about having a little selfie booth in the libraries? And do a little selfie with a little statement about being in the library.
Graduation.
Amy, did you want to comment? Yeah, you were collecting stories and platforms you're using. That too.
Trying to hold back, I have lots of comments. We have asked for years and years and years and years and years for stories. And I like the idea of the selfie booth, something that you can do locally. And I think the added angle here is not just staff writing down the stories, but actually getting the first-hand patrons would be really good. We do have 10 years of stories that we've collected from the Job Center people and Inspiration Space and other social innovators. We keep changing, keep upgrading it from different names. But 10 years of stories make a difference, and it also, I find that the stories are data, because over time, that's what enabled us to, maybe we should have that in the handouts, the basic needs chart that we used in December for a big event, that you kind of perceive that there's a sequence to basic needs, and asking our partners to say, hey, can we set up the information in that way so we're making referrals to the right place so people get help faster and more appropriate help, and so that we can help move people out of poverty. So that, that's an example of librarians helping public officials to solve community issues. And that's, we learned way back when from Gates Foundation Public Library Association that at that point, what they found nationally was that public officials don't believe that libraries are involved enough in solving community issues. And that's one thing that we've been really trying to frame in the work that we do, is that yes, you indeed are involved and you are solving community issues. I have more to say about the funding issue, but on the agenda to talk about, I'm kind of feeling like it was in the wrong sequence. Maybe I should have gone first, since I want to hear from Eli what he thinks about what I have to say. So stick around.
Is this a good time to transition?
Well, if you're ready.
And then,
Sure.
Are you
I'm sticking around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you everybody for your comments.
Once you let me loose, that's all.
Right.
I have this link here, so I'm going to be talking about this chart. Does Eli have one of these? Do you have a packet?
I do. I was gonna get it.
Get something. Go ahead. Go ahead. Longer.
Oh, the back over here.
The point that I wanted to make is that. Oh, wait, yeah. I love microphones. Just don't want me bursting into talk. Come on in a minute. Okay, so this is a chart that I've used the past few years, kind of showing the history of funding, because people who were new didn't necessarily know what all the different funding buckets were. So along the side are different funding lines or buckets. Then across the top are the different administrations. And of course, again, looking at patterns, looking at trends over time. What it seems is funding is a factor of the interests, the priorities, and the economic factors at a certain time. So back in the go to the Veteran Administration, back in the
Minter administration is where we had the biggest jump in the state aid, which is state standards. It's the third column down, or third row down the purple. That's where state aid doubled. And so, that was like, awesome, isn't this great? I don't think we appreciated at the time how phenomenal that was, and we just thought that would continue. The state aid would just keep doubling, and we've had trouble ever since then. But that was a factor of the economy at the time, because that was back in the days when Rick, I remember Rick called me one time, and of course now I remember you're videotaping me. Oh well. Rick called me and he says, do you need anything? He says, I got a shitload of money. Do you need anything? And I was like, I got a shitload of money too. And he told me to watch my language. But we had a lot of money to work with then, and we didn't appreciate it. And then the next administration, well, of course, when Jeff came in, they, and Rick as well, they were very interested in library technologies. That's when, of course, even in the Minter administration, we were working with the Gates Foundation. They were emphasizing technology, and the Department of State stepped in, and they set up that PC replacement program. And at one point, all of the PCs in public libraries were replaced at one time between the Gates Foundation and the Department of State. And then they retained that with a 3-year cycle. And then during the recession, Jeff brokered the deal for Newcastle County with Chris Kuhn, who's the county executive at the time, to join the Delaware Library Catalog. And to do that, he agreed that the state, it made sense for the state to fund the library technology infrastructure. And so that's when that was picked up statewide. And of course, they all tend to, well, Minter didn't support construction as much until she received that Library Journal Politician of the Year. And because it was like $1 million for construction the year before, and then the next year was like 10 to 13 million or something. And Rick said that was a $10 million award. So, so we got her on board with the construction that way. Under Markell, the construction, the square footage doubled. So that was pretty good. But see, here's the difference. Construction and the buildings, that's a badge of honor for legislators, for the community, and it's one-time funding. So even the water, 50 million that we're talking about in the paper today, I believe that is one-time money for a, they're setting up an account, or like a foundation, or whatever an investment. So a one-time investment to support water infrastructure, I think. I didn't read it that carefully because it's not libraries, but so it's a lot easier to fund one-time things. The problem, the difficulty we have with state aid is it's we want them to raise the bottom line, and that's really difficult. And I do want to assure you that I bug Jeff about state aid every chance I get. I remind him every chance I get. Oh, hi, there's Courtney. You can probably attest to that. That you want cash. You need more money to operate it. And what he says is, I know that's really hard. That's hard to do. His answer. So he knows that you want state aid. It's just really hard. And then the current is and I'm going to let you talk about what the current, what's going on now. So, all right. Well, let me ask you some questions, if that's okay. So, typically, the state says to departments, well, you can have, you can request a 1% increase or a 2% increase, or whatever. So we did get the 1%. Last year, Jeff asked all of that for libraries.
Yes.
Are you doing that again?
No, we had other divisions that we also have to support, but we did put in the request for the imagination library pilot for the 5 districts.
Okay, so that was, so the request this year is for the Imagination Library pilot. Okay, and so back to this chart again. So in this column, not the 2021 request, but what we're crediting Kearney with so far. We need to add a couple additional notes. Kearney is also to be credited in the orange row. He established the Delaware Library Consortium in the Delaware Code. Also, I thought was interesting was all the way down the bottom of purple that DHSS received $100,000 through the tobacco fund for their databases, which is really good. They did that on their own. And also in that column should be the, well, actually I guess it's in this year's column, the Dolly Parton Imagination Library pilot. Jeff is actually starting that out of existing funds right now, and then hoping that the line will be funded July 1. And ideally, 100% so we can do it statewide, but the request is for the pilot. Yeah.
So just back to how the state budgeting works. I'm assuming that it starts out kind of being zero-based in that whatever you got last year, you get this year. And you don't have cost of living built in, right? So salary increase, benefit increases are outside of that. It's important to know because in Newcastle County, it is typically built in. So in order to get any increase, this increase that we're talking about that's not recommended by the head of the department, in this case Secretary of State, it would have to be an initiative, a new initiative. So in this case, it's the Dolly Parton is the new initiative. And I think one of the questions we all need to ask ourselves is, in order to raise that baseline of state aid, what are we doing new? Like, how do we explain that need for that increase of the bottom line? And I think that's where we have not been effective. And we need to think about how can we explain that need? Now, here's what I want to understand. What I want to understand is when we have a new library like Route 9, or Lewis expanded, or Seaford, or Route 9, how can we use that as a justification? Look, we're funding these capital projects, they're increasing operating costs, they're increasing the need for staff. Why is that not translating into increased operating costs effectively, or the understanding that they're making?
So if we go back in time,
Here, what's going on?
Say hi, not on the microphone. So if we go back in time several years, we did put in a budget request for when Route 9 came online, in the state standards line. And it was also a year that, and I cannot remember what year this was, so I do apologize, that we had to do cuts in our general fund lines across the board throughout the department. So if you can imagine, we added it, but then we also had to get taken back. So when there's new libraries that do come online, we do as a department put that request in, because I usually work with Annie and her team to get a cost estimate of how that would impact
So why
students.
can't we say, okay, we understand that there was a financial crisis and we all took a hit and we were okay with doing that, but we're not there anymore, we're in a different place. So why can't we not say, we held off, we waited, but we have to go back to that point. And it's more of a strategy that I think we really need to come up with a strategy so that when times are bad, we understand, but when times are good, we can say, this has been in the queue for however long it's been in the queue. So that's one thing I think we need to talk about. But the other piece of that is we understand the department itself has constraints, but we also understand that JFC has flexibility, right? And I thought when we got that $200,000 increase or whatever it was 50,000 a year or 100,000. It was 4 years that we got that commitment. I don't remember what administration it was in, but that was not in the Department of State budget. Wasn't that a commitment from JFC? Well, remember when we got that? It was 4 years.
Well, the other thing that, and there's more history on this sheet than I haven't gone, or didn't go into some of the details. Do you remember, part of this was we had the co-chairs of JFC were both library supporters.
But
So that was
that's what I'm
Senator
getting
Cook
to.
and Representative DePinto, and they made sure there was extra money, additional money for libraries every year. So that's part of developing these relationships, especially with, well, I mean, we have good relationships for Bonba. I mean, we don't seem to have trouble getting construction money, but it's on the JFC where we really need to cultivate. And to the point about library champions, I love the fact that Cafe had brought, you never know when new legislators are elected, how they're going to turn out. If they're going to end up being leaders or the role that they're going to play. But I think it's a good practice to bring in the freshman legislators, ask them to say, I'm a library champion, and to cultivate that along the way. So we have that in Bombach and Bernie Lopez, but neither one of them are on a committee or on one of the finance committees, unfortunately. But hope is that we do that again in May. Well, we have freshmen, but anyway, that we take advantage of that when we have new people to get them to actually say that. I'm a library champion. And because we're working toward the future, we're laying the groundwork for people being in place, especially when the economy improves. If there's a lot of money, that's when we're most likely to be able to get it.
But from a small group of people, JFC, and that's the group that we really need to focus
Yes.
on. What are those? I think the co-chair was from Middletown last year.
What I think to your
We couldn't make that with. I mean, we really couldn't. Yeah, Tim Johnson.
I want to go back to your point about tying it to the construction, because there's no link between the construction and the state aid. But I think that could be, maybe we should try that strategy. It's actually put down there. Okay, these are the X number of libraries that are opening this year, and this is the additional cost for that. And try to get the state aid that way.
I think that's very simple, very understandable.
Yeah. What the heck, might as well try it. Yeah,
Two different comments. What you were just saying about the state aid for new libraries opening. Part of the problem is I was involved with Seaford. We opened in 2009. So I think construction started, or the project's been going on for years, getting it to the point. I think we started construction late 2007, and then it opened in 2009. At the time when it started, we were told that operating funds would increase because of constructions, and then the bottom fell out of the economy in 2008, and it never happened. So when you're talking about libraries building and needing more funds, it also needs to be retroactive.
Yeah.
Because there have been a lot of new libraries built since 2008-9, and the funds haven't increased.
Well, we should do a chart.
The other question I have, and if this is out of line, I apologize, but does going for funding for another pilot program or another, I'll call it special project, take away our ability to also, or make it more difficult to also be going after the state standard increases? Because are we going to hear from the legislators, like if we make an initiative to still go after increasing just general operations money, or, well, we're doing this pilot program for you, we're going to do whatever it's called, Dolly Partner, whatever, and we already hear, we do all your technology, it's kind of like, what else do you want? So my question is, does having a pilot program take away from our successes in trying to increase state aid?
Well, who knows? But I think think that this Dolly Parton's Imagination Library will really capture their imaginations or the possibility. I think it should generate some excitement, and hopefully that
Well, I'm not saying it's not a great project, I'm just
would
wondering.
help with goodwill for, oh yeah, libraries are really doing some key things here.
Yeah, but we've been doing that for the last however many years.
I don't know. It depends on the budget and how much is available.
Well, they're supposed to be having a.
That's the whole point, that there's a budget and it amounts to so much. And the question is, where do we want to put our emphasis? We want to have innovation and we want to have new programs, and be creative and state of the art. But at the same time, we can't get the cleaning services boosted because of budget problems. So that, at times, I think we're naive, I speak for myself, we're naive about how we're expressing this situation. Somehow we have a new program that's very creative, and the legislators will understand then that because of that creativity, we can increase their basic maintenance costs.
Well, I think.
And I don't see that.
Well, my concern is,
at all.
think of it, I don't know, just devil's advocate, let's think of it from the other direction, and I've heard some of this kind of rumblings, is we don't want to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, we're not doing anything else because we don't have any, try to keep everything simple so it's not a burden on anybody or a lot of work, and but we don't want to give the impression that we're not progressing or not keeping up, or because then, I think that's what happened in part with school libraries. So, which I also, Senator Cook was the proponent for school libraries, and the money you see on here for school libraries, thanks to her. Yeah.
What about using the argument that we now need to protect our investment in libraries?
Yeah. When we tried messages like, well, let's maximize the use of it. We funded these facilities and they're not open the hours that they could be. They're not to be accessible and available to the public. So we've tried that. But I like the idea of the chart. And it goes back to, we did a chart for technology funding. Of course, but that we were only convincing the partner state to give us more.
Great chart. Very convincing.
The chart. We'll do it. So, and I said this back in October that we should take that technology chart and see if we could apply it to state aid, and so that.
That's what.
That's what. Yes. So and so it's on my list, but I haven't gotten to it yet. But we need to get to it and
Yeah, I think
see
if
how
we
that's
had that for our major like day, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah. And so what I'd like is some of you can look at that technology chart and kind of brainstorm what, how it should look. That would be helpful too.
Maybe I think that in part we're heading in the right direction already. We got an additional $1 per resident in the state. We get $1 per resident in 900,000 people thereabouts. We're talking about $1 million. I've already talked to the chair of the finance committee about getting $1 million. I did that last year because I knew that's where we need. Now he said, "Oh, sure, I'll get you $1 million." Obviously didn't, but the reality is I'm thinking in that direction.
Yep.
I'm going to see him later today, and we're going to be able to get him.
Well, and that's,
hey, this is really important.
well, and that's what the lobbyists have told us, is to keep on the same message, because it takes several times for them to
So
really hear
there's
it.
no magic solution, there's no magic words. It's a matter of understanding what we're trying to do and keeping on subject and on target toward that end. And let's face it, most of the legislators are reasonable. And if they're presented with, gee, we've got roof problems here, we've got this problem there, we've got that problem there. We're having these problems because we're cutting back, we're cutting to the bone, the maintenance understand that, they really do. They said it has to, the number of legislators that I vote, they'll talk to it, but it's up to us to kind of bang away at that same
Yeah.
message. And it's not a fun message, hey, we need money to, to maintain things. Just like it's not a fun thing for us wherever we live. Oh gee, I gotta get a new roof, that's not much fun. I don't want to hear that message, but if it's necessary, we do it. And I think the legislators will be the same way if we keep pushing, hey, this is an area that we've done some wonderful capital things, we'll take the job and responsibility for balancing new stuff and maintenance stuff. If I can use it, in those terms. And we'll, but we need one part of it to be taken care of. We can't ignore it as if somehow there's going to be another cigarette settlement.
Well, I think we need to keep it to $1 and $1 million. We just, we're gonna try and,
Anchor that.
yeah,
Something that's happening.
and so we'll work on that. And we need to get going here. I just wanted to say one more thing about, this afternoon session. So, I was asked by Representative Jake to speak to the joint, Education Committee at 2:30, but just this week, I found out, in fact, thank God, attended this event last night. I got a last minute invitation to this event. So apparently, and I don't even really know all of what's happening here, but there's an organization in Delaware called giftglobal.org, and the head of that is Sam Beard. So Sam Beard is a person that the First Lady has been trying to connect me with. Long story, but anyway, so we finally connected. He says, "Here, come to this." And so he has this visitor in town who is Dr. John Hutton, who is a Cincinnati Children's Hospital pediatrician. He's a clinical researcher and scientist. So he's here. He was speaking last night about the birth of the 5 and the importance of reading to children, blah, blah, blah. Great. Find out he's also speaking to this education committee this afternoon, and apparently they have this whole agenda from 2:30 to 3:30. So, and I am not on this list, so I feel like I'm like crashing their party. And so I'm not sure exactly if I'm going to be at the beginning or the end of this. But let me just tell you who's on their agenda. So, of course, Representative Jake and Senator Sturgeon, and then Sam Beard, who's this person, and then Pam Defer, who works for him. Madeline Bayard is, she's from Odell, the Early Childhood Council. Kim Kay, can't pronounce her last name, she's from DOE, Office of Early Learning. This Dr. John Hutton, Maria Matos, Latin American Community Center, Molly Magarick, DHSS Deputy Cabinet Secretary, Megan Walls, who I met last night. She's Moore's pediatric psychologist, and then Dr. Deborah Burke, who's Wilmington University Director of Psychology Programs. So I'm hoping that you can attend. As I say, we might be at first, I might be last, but we should stay and go the whole thing because this is important to the legislators. We're in front of them, and they've asked us to come and talk about the Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, which is, to my point, they need to see that libraries are doing something that is critical, that's helping them solve their problems. So I think, kind of backed into this, but it's good that we even know about this. Can you imagine if this had been happening and wasn't even on libraries' radar anywhere? I mean, that's the scary part, is that these kinds of things happen all the time, and libraries need to be at every table to get the money we want. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just said, where is it?
It's in the, I believe it's in the Senate chamber. Yeah, so you can be up in the balcony. So we'll be in both. I think we're going to the House first. You can be up in the balcony for the proclamation, and then just walk on the second floor. Just walk across to the Senate,
up in that balcony, and I'm just a bit tight there until this starts.
We have these.
Yeah.
Since we're short on time, John, you want to come up and talk about construction now? And then we'll just do a final wrap up before we go.
Is this even working?
Yeah, it's working. Depends on how
I
you
get
hold
a
it.
yes and a no. That's okay, this works.
Yeah,
You have two sheets in your packet dealing with library construction. There are two projects that are requesting money for fiscal '21, the Hope Creek Public Library and the Somerville Public Library. Both of those are for expansion and remodeling, and both of those have prior funding. So there is funding that is in place already, so we're asking for the next year's funding. It's not really a new ask for those. The other sheet, and this goes back to what Susan said about thanking your legislators. This sheet shows the libraries that have had state funding for construction, and it shows the increase in square footage since 2010. It shows which projects are asking for funding this year, which ones have funding and are working, and it also, what it doesn't show though, is the total funding that's been out there. And I went back and I looked through my records, and the Construction Act came about, and the first year of funding was fiscal '91. So in 29 years, the state has appropriated $110 million for library construction. So I've heard several people say it's an easy ask. It is kind of an easy ask. It's something that you can point to when they say, you know, what are we getting for that money? You can look across the street. There's a building. We put $10 million, and look at this wonderful 33,000 square foot building that we got for that. And look at all the things that are happening in that building because you provided the funding to build it. So those are the projects that we're asking for. That will actually bring us up closer to $115 million when we get, if we get this just over $4 million in fiscal '21, and run us up to the end of our 30th year of receiving library construction funding. If there are any questions about these projects, I know we're running short on time. I will be back here for a few minutes. If you have a project in your area that you need to talk to your legislator about, see me. We'll go over it. Any questions about that? Any general questions about library construction funding?
Michelle, are we ready to wrap up? I mean, we had a lot of really great ideas today, so I want to make a plug for the Library Association's Legislative Action Committee. We're going to be reconvening to kind of review what happened today, but everyone who registered today, we certainly can keep the dialogue going via email. If you can't be a part of the committee, you can still contribute to how we want May to look, and then how we want future leg days to look. Also want to highlight that we have the Engage software that is part of the American Library Association, so we can also do email campaigns really easily, and that's something I think we're going to be working with school librarians on, because a lot of them can't come to days like today. So there's a lot of opportunities to take what we've talked about today and continue on. And I don't want to steal your thunder if this is what you were going to say. But want to also just let you know that we are going to continue this conversation. If you have ideas for what you'd like to see the Library Association doing, please continue to talk to us about that.
And Eli, will you be around for a few minutes after?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because yeah, I feel like there's a lot of good activity work that happened, and we didn't really get a chance to kind of come back full circle to it. So you'll be available to stay for a little bit?
Yeah, I can't go over to the hall. I can hang out here for a while.
Okay, good. And like Allison said, I just really wanted to thank the people that did work on today's event, the Legislative Action Committee. So if you were a part of that, if you would just stand up for a quick moment. If you would like to be a part of this committee is without a chair, hint, hint. So anybody that would like to be a part of that, there is definitely room to do that. What we have on the table over here, the orange packets, there is a packet for each representative and each senator. Even if you did not set up a meeting with them, we hope that you would stop over, pop your head in, talk to their aide, talk about hopefully getting a meeting set up for sometime in February, and just kind of get your face in front of them. I want to thank the Friends of Delaware Libraries. They have also put together little candy packets that you can hand out to each representative and senator as well. They're at the registration table, you said?
Yes, I don't know if they're just in a bag or what, because Kate just mentioned that to me on her way out, so. I'll go.
They're in the bag, can you drop them off, and then with the names already on.
Okay. Could we maybe put them out at the registration table or maybe on this table in the packet? And then we'll make sure any packets that don't get picked up, we will take around and make sure they all get dropped off. So please bookmark on your calendars now, Tuesday, May 12th. That's going to be our full advocacy day. Today was just light. And like Allison said, we're going to reconvene as a committee, try to determine what worked, what didn't work. We would really like your feedback. Today's event was also videotaped. So give me some time, but I will try to get that up on Niche Academy or somewhere and get that out to every DLA member. So any final questions or closing comments? Okay, so our exhibit table will be open in about 10 minutes over there. Please stop by, say hi, take pictures, post it on social media, and please stay for the 2 o'clock proclamation and the 2:30 meeting. There's no lunch today. Lunch is on your own. Okay. Not brunch, yes. So stock up. All right. Thank you.
Till 1.